You need to hear about the one rule every Appalachian Ranger is afraid to break, because the woman who broke it barely made it back down the mountain to tell you. In July of 2015, deep in the Linville Gorge Wilderness of western North Carolina, a 29-year-old junior ranger was given the simplest job of the season: lock a single gate. She'd been told the one rule that came with it: never touch what's left on the latch. What she found there instead defied everything she thought she understood about these Appalachian Mountains. By the time she reached the ranger station that night, the hood of her truck was caved in from the inside out, and the handprint on her door didn't belong to anything in the wildlife guide. Her name is Josephine Remmy, and this happened to her. Josephine drove a decommissioned '09 Ford F250 with a cracked visor mirror and a Forest Service decal peeling at one corner, radio locked to Channel 3 because Channel 9 didn't officially exist. 13 months on the job, and she still clipped her father's old compass to her belt loop out of habit, not need. Last week of July. Her whole assignment tonight was closing and chaining the iron gate at the Table Rock access point, same as every evening the crew wasn't camped up top. Down at the creek, the water hit the shelf rock in 2 notes, and a wood thrush answered it. Same call, same timing. Every evening she'd worked here. Senior Ranger Hannah Sarin gave her the handoff at the trailhead before heading back down. "Gate stays chained till the crew's back Monday," she said. "If there's residue on the latch, don't clean it. Leave it be. That's the one rule up here." She said it so easy, like a speed limit, and that's exactly why Josephine forgot it 30 seconds later. She was already thinking about the six-pack sweating in her cooler and her sister's text she still hadn't answered. Now here's the thing about Josephine. She had ADHD, hadn't slept right in days, and was running on gas station coffee and a true crime podcast in one earbud. By the time she reached the gate, Hannah's instruction had flipped itself inside her head into its exact opposite. Residue on the latch, clean it off. She checked the sky. Maybe 40 minutes of light left before Table Rock Road turned into something she wouldn't drive twice in the dark. Her father used to say, "A locked gate isn't there to keep something out. It's there to remind it what the line is." The thought came and went easy, and she kept walking. Up close, the latch was scarred. 7 neat file marks worn deep into the iron, deep enough to catch a fingernail. She'd noticed them a dozen times before. Maintenance crew, probably. It never once occurred to her to count them. She pulled the rag from her back pocket, the same faded blue one she used on the truck's dipstick. And that's when the thrush across the creek dropped out of its call mid-note. Not the whole evening going silent, just that one sound gone missing from a loop she'd heard every night for 13 months. If she didn't move fast, she'd be stuck on that ridge till sunrise with no way back, no cell signal down in the gorge, and nothing but a flashlight and a gate log to keep her company. And she was about to spend the next 90 seconds doing the one thing she'd just been told, in plain words, never to do. The evening had gone thick and still in a way she chalked up to the heat. No storm on the forecast, but the air had weight to it now, pressing instead of moving, the way it does right before a mountain decides to do something. Then came the smell. Wet dog, and something rotted underneath it, rolling downslope off the gorge wall, strong enough that she tasted it at the back of her throat before her brain even caught up and called it a smell. She was 3 swipes into the latch with her rag when it hit her. She froze. Her eyes went to the tree line first, out of instinct, scanning the laurel for movement, for anything. But that's not where her attention landed. It landed on the truck, because the driver's door wasn't white anymore. A handprint, dark and oily, smeared clean across the door panel, and it smelled like iron before it even looked like blood. 14 inches across, easy. 4 long fingers splayed wide. A thumb set at an angle that didn't belong to any black bear track she'd ever measured out here, and she'd measured plenty. The edges of the print were already drying tacky, which meant whatever left it hadn't gone far. And that's the exact second she remembered, half a beat too late, what Hannah had actually told her to do with residue on that latch. Now, if you've ever worked a lonely job in a place like this, you already know the feeling. The rules that get handed to you casual, offhand, easy to forget. Those are almost always the ones that matter most. Josephine was about to learn that the hard way, and she wasn't the first ranger up on this ridge to learn it. She had her answer. Something had left that print, but the question chasing right behind it was worse. Why was it on the truck, 40 feet from the gate, and not on the latch at all? She backed up a step, boots crunching loose gravel, eyes still locked on that print like it might move if she blinked. Her hand found the bear spray on her belt out of muscle memory, thumb resting on the safety without her telling it to. The gorge below kept running the same 2 notes it always did, creek hitting shelf rock, but the thrush never came back in. She noticed that now, filed it away somewhere in the back of her mind next to the print and the smell and the 40 minutes of daylight ticking down to less. She thought about just leaving the latch half clean right then and getting in the truck. That would have been the smart move. Instead, she found herself doing the math on the print again, turning it over, trying to make it fit something she already knew. A prank. A hunter's dog that got into something dead. Anything with an explanation attached to it. The rag was still in her hand. She hadn't dropped it. She hadn't even realized she was still holding it until she looked down and saw her knuckles had gone white around the fabric. Somewhere behind her, up the slope toward the gate, gravel shifted underfoot. Not a gust of wind moving brush. A single deliberate sound, like weight coming down on one foot and then stopping, like something had decided to wait and see what she'd do next. She didn't turn around yet. She made herself finish the thought first, the print, the smell, the 40 minutes of light left, the gate she still hadn't chained, because turning around meant admitting she already knew this wasn't a hunter's dog and never had been. Her father's old compass, clipped to her belt loop since the day they buried him, dug into her hip when she shifted her weight. She hadn't thought about that compass all evening. She thought about it now. The gravel shifted again, closer this time and slower, like it wasn't in any hurry at all, like it already knew exactly how this ended and was simply waiting for her to catch up, patient in a way nothing wild had any business being. Josephine turned around. Nothing was there, just the tree line, laurel thick and dark, and the last orange light cutting sideways through it low enough to throw shadows that hadn't existed 20 minutes ago. No shape, no movement, no sound now either. The gravel had gone quiet the second she turned, like whatever made it had known exactly when she would. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest, a hard double knock instead of a steady beat, and her palms had gone slick enough that the rag slipped once before she caught it against her leg. She started building the explanation right there, standing in the gravel with her back half turned to the truck. Hunter's dog, probably. Something big that got into a carcass somewhere up the ridge and tracked the mess down looking for water. That tracked. Mostly. Her father's line came back to her then, and this time it wasn't easy. It wasn't a passing thought she could brush aside and keep walking. A locked gate isn't there to keep something out. It's there to remind it what the line is. She hadn't locked anything. She'd wiped it clean. And standing there, working the rag between her fingers, She understood for the first time that the two things weren't the same at all. She yanked open the truck door. It stuck in the frame, swollen tight from humidity that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. And her keys slipped once in a hand gone slick with sweat. Cold iron latch still in her left hand, her pulse pounding hot in her ears, her body running two temperatures at once, neither making sense with the July heat sitting heavy on the gorge. Keys, door handle, wrong angle. She tried again. The door gave. Then the scream came, and it started before her hand even found the lock button. High, wrong, rolling off 3 separate ridgelines at once, so that for one full second she genuinely could not tell if it was coming from somewhere out in the laurel or from directly inside her own skull. It wasn't an animal sound the way she understood animal sounds. It had a shape. Animal sounds didn't usually have. Closer to a woman's voice pitched somewhere it was never built to go. She had maybe 2 seconds to decide. Grab the bear spray off her belt and turn to face whatever had just answered that first scream, or get inside the truck and lock the door and accept that Hannah's rule had existed for a reason she'd ignored the second she'd heard it. She chose the truck. Her hand found the door handle instead of the spray, and she hauled herself up into the cab hard enough to crack her knee against the wheel. The door slammed. Her thumb found the lock. The second scream answered the first from somewhere much closer, directly behind the truck bed, close enough that she felt it more than heard it, a pressure change against her eardrums before the sound itself even landed. She knew exactly where it was now. That certainty sat worse in her stomach than the not knowing ever had, because now there was a decision sitting right behind it. Look or don't look. She didn't look, not yet. Her hands found the keys and she jammed them toward the ignition twice before the third try actually caught the slot. The engine turned over, sluggish, coughing once like it didn't want to start any more than she wanted it to. Through the windshield, the last of the daylight was draining out of the gorge fast now, in a way that made the tree line look flatter, closer, like it had crept in a few feet while she wasn't watching. Table Rock Road, with its switchbacks and its drop-offs, and no guardrails anywhere along it, was still ahead of her. And every minute she sat here was a minute she wouldn't get back once real dark came down. Something shifted against the truck bed. Metal groaned under weight that had no business being that heavy for anything native to these mountains. She put the truck in reverse and didn't wait to see what came around the tailgate. The truck lurched backward, tires spitting gravel, and the whole tree line moved at once, laurel snapping and folding in a wave, like something walking through it weighed more than anything that had any business living in this gorge. The headlights swept the lot as she turned the wheel, and for one full second, they caught it standing dead center in the beam. Here's the thing about it, and I want to be careful how I say this, because this is the part people always get wrong when they picture it. It wasn't hunched over. It stood straight, taller than the truck cab by a good 2 feet, shoulders wide enough to fill the gap between 2 pines behind it. The fur wasn't the clean, even coat you'd picture from a nature documentary. It came in dark, uneven patches, matted flat in places like something had been rolling in wet leaf rot, and slicked back in others with something darker than mud. Where the headlights hit it square, she caught the shine of 2 eyes, low and close together for something that size, catching the light flat and green for just a half second before it turned its head away from the glare. The arms hung wrong. Too long for the torso, knuckles brushing near the knee, and when it shifted its weight from one side to the other, the whole shape of it rolled like the joints underneath didn't sit where a skeleton was supposed to put them. The chest rose and fell slow, like it was in no rush at all to decide what happened next. The smell came through the vents before her brain fully processed what her eyes were doing. Wet dog and rot, and something underneath both of those that she'd only ever smell one more time in her life and never be able to name. Then the hood buckled. It happened fast enough that the sound came before she understood the cause. A deep metal groan, like a dropped oil drum, the whole front panel of the truck folding inward like a fist through a paper bag. Her body threw itself sideways against the door on instinct, her shoulder cracking the window frame. And her own heartbeat was the loudest thing in the cab until it wasn't anymore, because something outside was breathing louder than it. She slammed the truck into reverse, and the tires caught this time, gravel spraying hard enough that she heard it pepper the wheel wells. The engine screamed, and the truck screamed back at whatever had just put a dent the size of a manhole cover into a Ford frame like it was tin foil. In the split-second flash of the dome light against the windshield, she caught it. Not 14 inches of random damage this time, but 4 long fingers and a thumb pressed dead center into the hood, matching exactly, the print already drying on the driver's door. Same elongated thumb, same gap between the 3rd and 4th finger. Not 2 animals, 1, marking the same territory twice within 90 seconds, like it needed her to understand something the first time and hadn't been convinced she had. And right behind that thought came the latch. 7 file marks worn deep into iron she'd wiped clean an hour ago because a rule sounded casual enough to ignore. Not decades of maintenance wear. A count. Someone had been marking something for a long time, and somewhere in the back of her mind, the number rearranged itself into a shape she couldn't unsee. 7 markers, and whatever this was tonight, made 8. The truck lurched again as she overcorrected the wheel, back tires finding the gravel road proper, and in the mirror she watched the shape drop down onto all 4s, faster now, faster than something that size should move, closing the gap between the gate and her back bumper in 3 strides that ate the distance whole. She hit the gas. The charge broke off as fast as it started. 1 second, the shape filled her mirror. The next, the tree line swallowed it whole, the laurel snapping shut behind it, like it had never been there at all. She should have felt safe. The engine wouldn't turn over clean, sputtering twice before catching. And in that half-second gap, in the sudden absence of anything crashing through brush behind her, she heard breathing. Not her own. Close. Right against the driver's side window, fogging glass she hadn't rolled down in an hour, patient in a way nothing that had just torn a truck hood open had any right to be. She didn't look at the glass. She put both hands on the wheel, kept her eyes locked dead ahead on the first switchback of Table Rock Road, and drove. By the time the station lights came into view through the trees, the gorge behind her had gone back to exactly the sound it always made. Creek hitting shelf rock in 2 notes, a wood thrush answering right on cue. Same call, same timing. Like the whole evening had reset itself the second she crossed onto the paved road. That should have felt like relief. It didn't. Hearing that ordinary sound again after everything sat worse in her chest than the scream had. Hannah was waiting on the porch when she pulled in, not pacing, not checking her watch, just sitting there like she'd known exactly how long this would take. She didn't ask what happened. She looked once at the caved-in hood, once at the print still drying dark on the door, and went inside without a word. She came back out with a mug of coffee and pressed it into Josephine's hands before either of them said anything at all. Josephine's hands shook too hard to drink it. She set it down on the porch rail instead. "You touched it after the smell hit," Hannah said finally. "That print's not an attack, Joe. It's a receipt." Josephine didn't ask what that meant. Some part of her understood she wasn't going to get an answer even if she did, and some smaller part of her didn't want one. She thought about the latch. 7 file marks she'd noticed a dozen times and never once thought to count, because counting them would have meant admitting they meant something. She didn't say anything about them to Hannah. Hannah didn't bring them up either. Neither woman said out loud that there were 8 now. Her father's compass was still clipped to her belt loop, same as always, and for the first time in 13 months, she thought about taking it off. She didn't. Inside the station, she reached for the radio to log the incident. Standard procedure, time and location, and a description she already knew she wasn't going to write down accurately, no matter how hard she tried. That's when Channel 9 clicked on. Not Channel 3, the one she'd had the radio locked to all evening. Channel 9, the frequency that wasn't supposed to exist on any Forest Service band, the one nobody at this station had ever officially assigned to anything. It held for 2 full seconds. A woman's voice, calm, almost bored, reading off a string of numbers that could have been map coordinates, could have been something else entirely. And then it cut to static before Josephine's hand even found a pen. She sat there with the receiver in her hand for a long moment, static hissing low, and didn't touch the dial. Hannah didn't look over, didn't ask if she'd heard it too. Because here's the thing about that rule Josephine broke tonight, the one about leaving the residue alone. It was never really about keeping a gate clean. It was the one agreement holding a line in place up on that ridge, an agreement that had been kept, quietly, by 7 rangers before her, going back further than anyone currently working that station could actually confirm. And Josephine Remmy was the first one in 8 to find out, up close, in the dark, on the hood of her own truck, exactly what happens when somebody else has to redraw that line themselves. The compass stayed on her belt loop. The radio stayed on Channel 9 just for a moment, just long enough to make sure the static didn't hold anything else. It didn't. Not that night.